Welcome to SpringLaw's 2019 Spring Forward Legal Updates webinar series. This series is designed to provide a comprehensive legal overview of key issues related to employment law and human rights in Ontario. SpringLaw is a virtual employment law firm advising on workplace legal issues for employers, employees, freelancers, and executives from a wide range of industries. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar and find it useful and informative. To reach our team, please visit SpringLaw at www.springlaw.ca. And now to our presenters.
Good morning and welcome to SpringLaw's Spring Forward Legal Updates, our monthly webinar series to give workplaces and employers and employees and executives an update on where the law is right now. Today is our sixth of our 2019 webinar series, and the topic is recruitment, AI, and human judgment. We're going to explore how tech and software and automation all intersect with human judgment and the human judgment aspects of HR, recruiting, and human rights generally. This topic is relevant to any workplace with a computer, whether you have a fancy software, an AI software program in place, or whether you simply use an Excel spreadsheet and use filters in your columns. You're automating data and you're using some sort of top layer of AI to process information. So hopefully this webinar will be relevant to all workplaces with a computer. So my name is Lisa Stam, and presenting with me today is my colleague Oren Barbalat. We're both lawyers at SpringLaw. If you are one of our clients, then you already know that we are employment lawyers here in Ontario. We have a virtual firm. We're paperless. We really love to use tech in our day-to-day work experience. If you're new to our law firm community, welcome. During the webinar, please feel free to ask any questions through the chat function in the software. If we can't get to your questions, because we are trying to always keep these webinars under 30 minutes, if we can't get to your questions, then just reach out to us afterwards and grab the handout from the handouts tab in the software and reach out to us after if you have any follow-up questions. Finally, for more information about our firm, please come visit our website. We have an award-winning blog there, a link to our subscription for our monthly newsletter, more information about our subscription program for employers, a free ebook on Bill 47, and an ebook for recently terminated employees as an alternative to legal services. So lots on our website. Come on and visit. In the meanwhile, let's jump in. Okay, I am Lisa, and Oren is presenting with me. So today, here's a quick roadmap of what we're going to talk about. Do a little bit of a 101 on AI, just so that we all understand what we're talking about. Deal with how, in the workplace, probably one of the biggest impacts is the human rights, and how during recruiting, the risk of decisions that may need a bit more human judgment. Some of the strengths and weaknesses of using AI in the employment context, AI in recruitment specifically, applications of AI in recruitment, and this potential for bias that we're going to dig into, and then just some takeaways for employers. So AI 101. AI, artificial intelligence, is all about predictions. It's all about using machines and machine learning and technology to predict what the answer might be if there's missing information. So if you are using an Excel spreadsheet, you would fill in that data, and it isn't truly AI because it's not necessarily filling in the missing data. AI takes it all a layer deeper, where it predicts what the answer might be with the missing data. It can often be far more effective than humans, but as we'll talk about, there's of course risks to what conclusions might be drawn based on this data. It takes the information that you already have, that you input, and then it uses it to generate information that you don't have, which is why it's such a powerful tool. So some of the cornerstones of AI include machine learning, deep learning, and content as a testing ground, which we're going to just jump into now. Go ahead, Oren.
Thanks, Lisa. Great overview. I'm going to touch on some of the cornerstones of AI, which Lisa just mentioned. So we have machine learning. It's often used interchangeably with AI. It's not necessarily the same thing. Machine learning is the ability for an algorithm to learn from prior data in order to produce a certain behavior. So it's teaching machines to make decisions in situations they've never seen before, and then making new predictions based on unanticipated correlations. Supervised machine learning, it's really the ability to train an algorithm, and the most mainstream approach to machine learning is showing an algorithm a data set of situations and then telling the algorithm what the right decision is. And so you're effectively training a model with the hope that once the model is trained, you can then feed new, more foreign data through the algorithm and then allow it to start making its own predictions. And hopefully the machine begins making intelligent decisions. Deep learning, it's a branch of machine learning. It's not necessarily the same thing. Frankly, it's probably way too complex for at least lawyers to explain, but it's an added layer of machine learning, and it's kind of the difference between making correlations between words and now applying that to things like pictures, right? So the ability of an algorithm to now recognize that a cat is a cat or a dog is a dog, or that on vacation, you're the person in all these photos. So that's kind of the technology behind sorting faces in your iPhone, for example.
Mm-hmm. Or Facebook, right? I mean, think about, or when you are Googling, just all of the, and you're on, just in any sort of general search, all the information that comes up predicting what you want. I mean, this is, we all have experienced this as a heavily used piece of marketing and advertising. But, you know, we can start to apply this to the workplace. Just a quick note on employment's Human Rights Law 101, Section 5 of our Ontario Human Rights Code, and it's largely similar across the different provinces of Canada, speaks to all these different protected grounds in employment. So all these different ways in which you cannot discriminate against a person in the workplace without it, giving that employee a claim for discrimination. Here's the federal version of that. We bring this up right now as a backdrop that these are all the different kinds of categories that a machine doesn't care about. I mean, the machine, the AI in general, won't have that human judgment about whether or not the outcome is potentially breaching a ground of discrimination, as an example, or bringing in biases. The machine can't assess that data that way. So this is where our jobs are not going to be entirely automated and replaced anytime soon. Lawyers, HR managers, we are all important in helping with the humanity of the workplace and bringing in the judgment about whether or not this outcome of this otherwise very important and useful tool, and efficient tool, whether or not it's going to apply in a non-biased and practical way. So some strengths of AI. I'll start this one, Oren. AI can be very adept at reviewing large volumes of data and identifying patterns and trends that might not be apparent to a human. It improves over time. You can train your AI. It has fast processing and real-time predictions. It also doesn't get tired. I mean, these are some of the practical human aspects of it that, if you're doing a great big recruiting drive, you're probably doing it when your organization is swamped and needs that person on deck, and you're busy, you're tired. We all make human errors. So some of the strengths of AI are that, there isn't the human error aspect that is just a real life reality of the workplace. Oren, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, it's a very good description of it. I would just add that One of the key strengths of AI specifically is determining complex interaction effects. So if you have a large data set, for example, you have a lot of variables. As the amount of variables increase, it's harder for a person to determine correlation and cause and effect. And an example of this is, let's say you have a judge who's an expert in their field, and they have an accused person before them, and that accused person is seeking bail, and the judge's job is then to decide, do I give them bail or do I not give them bail? And usually this determination is based on whether or not they think the accused person will flee. And so a judge looking at this person might think that naturally, if the person has a criminal record, that they're more likely to flee. Well, that might be the case. It could also be the case that they're more likely to flee if they've never been employed, for example. And the reason I'm using this example is because this actually happened. There was a study done to determine whether judges were better than an algorithm at determining an accused person's flight risk. And the study found that algorithms were much better. And the reason they were much better is because they were trained on a lot of data. And when looking at the key variables to determine whether or not, for example, an accused person would flee, there are so many different data points and interaction effects, right? So you have one variable causing another variable, that a human's ability, even an expert, it tends to diminish as you have more variables. And so of course, yeah, AI improves over time, it does things quickly, but it's really good at figuring out those complex interaction effects.
You know, I picture when we were, whenever I've been involved in, you know, when I was in a bigger firm, involved in these great big recruitment drives for the summer students, especially at a law firm. And it's funny that, you know, there should be many data points that go into that decision, but our brains can only handle so much. And so people start to really focus in on, oh, well, they speak 5 languages, or, oh, they had excellent grades, but there's maybe, you know, dozens of other data points to include at the beginning of the whole process. You can really think through how do we balance all the different criteria that we are looking for in an employee. So, you know, this idea of AI being able to handle a ton of data is a really easy to understand example for most of us, that our brains can only handle so many criteria when we're doing this recruiting.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But there are weaknesses.
There are weaknesses. It's promising, but it's not perfect. So one of the main weaknesses of AI is that an algorithm isn't going to explain its reasoning. Right? If you have, this is what the law is about often, right? We get people to explain their decisions. Why did you do X, right? If you're a hiring manager, why did you hire this candidate and not the other candidate, right? So you can interrogate a human being. You can't interrogate an algorithm. It's not going to tell you why it's making a certain connection. It's just going to make the connection. Machines are also bad at unknown unknowns, right? So it doesn't know what it doesn't know. Human beings are generally pretty good at knowing what we don't know. As lawyers, we do this all the time. We get asked questions. Our clients sometimes get frustrated because we say, we don't have enough information, right? We can't tell you what the answer is because we don't have enough information or enough data points to confidently tell you what the answer is. An algorithm isn't going to do that, right? So even if it isn't trained on enough data to make a strong prediction, it will still make the prediction and present it as accurate. And then it's up to the technologists and the coders to really look behind what's going on to determine it, because again, the algorithm isn't going to tell you what's going on. Mm-hmm. And another main weakness of AI is that it learns human biases. And this is something we talk about pretty frequently. It's something that I'm certainly going to talk about throughout this presentation, is that if you train an algorithm with bad data, it's going to perpetuate whatever relationships already exist, right? This goes back to machine learning and supervised machine learning, right? If the data set is tainted, the outcomes will be tainted as well. And I'll quickly mention a case study that demonstrated this. Back in 2013, a group of Google researchers, they trained an algorithm to capture relationships in Google News articles, right? So it then unleashed the algorithm on, I think, 3,000 words from Google News, and I wanted to see if the algorithm could pick up relationships. And it did. It was really good. So, for example, the algorithm could determine man is to king as woman is to queen, or sister is to woman as brother is to man. That was great. There's only one problem. It was also blatantly sexist. So if you ask the algorithm Paris is to France as Tokyo is to X, it would say X is Japan. But if you asked it father is to doctor as mother is to X, it would say X is nurse. So obviously this, the data set itself was tainted because human beings who are writing news articles, they create certain relationships, right? And certain relationships will emerge in a data set. And if the algorithm is trained on that data set, it's going to continue to produce those results. And over time, will amplify those results as well. And that, again, is one of the dangers or weaknesses of AI. And now, how does that apply to recruitment, which is what we're here to talk about? AI and recruitment, it's an emerging use of AI. It's something that's been used already, right? So it's designed to reduce or remove time-consuming activities like manually screening resumes. That's been around for a while. Anyone who's ever applied to a job through Workopolis, you've probably figured it isn't a human being making sure that you've got your BA, your high school diploma. Technology has been good for a while at picking things like that up. But what the AI is really doing nowadays, one of the newest use cases is improving the quality of hires, right? As organizations comb through their hiring decisions and they're really assessing their workforce, there's really become an importance on hiring the right person, right? I'm getting the right fit, because hiring the wrong person can be not only financially devastating, there can be consequences for morale, it can create liability, and it's just become increasingly important to get the right candidate. And that's a lot of what AI in recruiting is doing. And then, of course, it also claims to reduce bias, which is interesting because a lot of what we're talking about is how it amplifies bias. But really, one of the stated benefits of the technology is actually to take out the heuristics, to take out the subjectivities in hiring, right? Traditionally, as Lisa mentioned, we see this in law firm hiring, right? Why is a candidate hired, right? You go through OCIs, you go through in-firm interviews, and ultimately someone hires you because, sure, you're hopefully smart enough, but they like you, right? These things are very subjective. So the technology promises to kind of move away from the subjectivities and make this more objective, make it more data-driven. So let's talk about some of the actual applications, right? I've talked more broadly about what it does. One application is intelligence screening software. And so what this is doing, yes, of course, is sifting through resumes to make sure you've got the right qualifications. But more than that, what it's doing now is the algorithms are getting trained on organizational data, and they're creating these complex interaction effects to determine who are the successful people at an organization, right? So it's looking at things like tenure, turnover rates, performance, and then the algorithm's trying to figure out what other qualities or variables it can associate those things with, right? And then once the algorithm determines that, it's now looking for that in new resumes. And then it's sifting through the resumes, and it's then presenting them to the HR person or the organization as the list of candidates that you should at least interview. Now, that's very promising, obviously, right? Again, I talked about the quality of hire being very important. We talked about the fact that hopefully you're reducing bias now if you're making this decision objectively. But again, how is the tool actually evaluating the candidate? And can it explain its choices, right? An HR person could explain why they hired someone. If the AI tool is specifically choosing someone because they're a certain gender or ethnicity, or because they're not a certain gender or ethnicity, you wouldn't really know. And a good example of this is a case study by Amazon. So Amazon developed what was really its own intelligence screening software. It said, we're Amazon, we're the biggest software company in the world. We don't need an AI vendor. We'll do this ourselves, right? And what they were trying to do was to automate recruitment, right, to improve the quality of hires and to reduce bias. And so while they were good at the former, They were good at, they were good at the former. They were good at automating things. They didn't reduce bias. They did the opposite. And that was because the AI was trained on 10 years worth of data of Amazon's hiring decisions. And I guess what the algorithm found out was people who work at Amazon tend to be male. And so when the algorithm was then sifting through resumes of potential candidates, it started penalizing candidates who had the word women in their resumes. So women's chess club, for example, or women's colleges. So thankfully, this was piloted, right? So you had the technologists and the coders behind the product. They were constantly evaluating the product. They were looking at it. They discovered this. They say they didn't rely on this to make any hiring decisions, and they eventually scrapped it. But what this really demonstrates is the danger on relying on AI is the entire solution, right? Imagine this wasn't Amazon doing this in-house. Imagine it was Amazon using a tool to do this, producing the same results, and the end user is simply an HR person or an organization receiving the list of candidates, right? They might not know why those candidates were selected. They might just know that these candidates are deemed to be the most successful at an organization.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about another tool used in AI and recruiting, and that's sourcing. So sourcing is kind of it's intelligence screening software kind of on steroids, right? So once the software has looked at the data set and determined who a successful candidate is, it now has those relationships, right? So it's made those associations, and now instead of sifting through resumes, sourcing, it's a passive form of recruitment, and it's targeting job ads at specific candidates online. And it's doing this in many ways. One of them is sourcing from social, and sourcing from social is using AI to place ads that target job seekers via their social media feed based on their profile data, location, and interests. And then the ads will then link the user directly to the job details page. So the AI has determined what the key measures for success are for these candidates. It's then seeking them out online through things like your Facebook account or Instagram, and then it's leaving those job ads for you to apply, right? So it's specifically targeting certain individuals in the hope that they'll apply. What are some of the potential problems with this? Well, a Facebook account, even one with decent privacy settings, it might tell the software if the candidate is a parent, if they like to party, where they've gone on vacation, how they lean politically, what concert they went to, and so on. While some of this information is harmless, some of it could definitely run an employer into human rights issues. So obviously during a job interview, most of you probably know you can't ask a candidate straight up if they have children. However, if you have sourcing software going to someone's Facebook account with deep learning, as I described earlier, it can tell what a baby looks like. It could probably tell if someone's pregnant. It can probably identify an angry Andrew Scheer meme, right? So it kind of knows what it's looking for, and it will target those specific individuals. As a thought experiment, let's say you have a tech sales company, and they employ a roster of tech salespeople, and they want to get more. They want to get more similar candidates who've been very successful. Now, let's say the AI combs through the data set, and they find out that the most successful people at tech sales are single men in their 30s, right? The algorithm will make those associations. Hypothetically, is now only targeting single males in their 30s on Facebook, and it will then generate, right? It would help those people actually apply for the jobs. So by the time a recruiter or organization is receiving resumes, they might not know who's not applying, right? It's a very kind of passive and indirect form of discrimination. I think Lisa touched on this earlier, but with discrimination, at least pursuant to the Human Rights Code in Ontario, I'm sure it's similar in other provinces, it doesn't have to be intentional, right? It can be indirect and it can be systemic. So even as an organization, if you're not intending to discriminate, but by virtue of your hiring practices, certain groups are indirectly discriminated against, that's discrimination, right? It's just in this case, it's harder to see and it's harder to know if it's actually happening. And again, these things get amplified, they get perpetuated over time, and that's some of the dangers in using sourcing and using intelligence screening software. So let's go on to some takeaways. Are we saying that you shouldn't use recruiting software? Not at all, right? There are a lot of positive uses for it. Obviously, you can really automate things for a large organization receiving thousands of resumes. The ability to screen, the ability to improve the quality of the hires. It's very powerful, right? And of course, the ability to reduce bias, right? The software isn't going to, it's going to notice if you have a job ad that says we're hiring only 30-year-old men. It will see that. But again, it's not perfect, right? If it's trained on a tainted data set, it will produce those things. And again, if the AI is the entire solution, right? If you're the organization strictly relying on the AI, the danger again is that you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you're not seeing. You don't know what the process was for selecting those candidates or selecting who can actually apply for your job. And then we get into liability, right? Ultimately, if you're the organization and you're the one using the software which makes discriminatory decisions, you're probably liable as far as the Human Rights Code is concerned. And so if you're talking to a software company about using their product, one of their value propositions is going to be we're reducing bias. What I would be interested in is asking them, hey, if you're claiming to reduce bias, are you going to indemnify me if you do the exact opposite, right? I'm not sure what the answer is. Another thing I would ask them is, how are they actually accounting for the legal meanings of the prohibited grounds for discrimination in the Human Rights Code? So as Lisa mentioned earlier, certain things that are easier to identify, right? An algorithm can probably figure out what citizenship is based on, like what country someone's from. But how is it figuring out things like gender identity or gender expression or family status, right? These have legal meanings, and I would want to know how the technologists are ensuring that their algorithms don't discriminate based on those factors. And then, of course, it's ultimately a business decision. A lot of this comes down to not only being efficient in reducing bias, but it's a PR and branding piece, right? Obviously, nowadays, you would want to highlight as an organization, hey, we're a company that actively promotes inclusivity. We're actively taking steps to use technology. We're actively making sure we're using the latest tools to reduce bias and to be an inclusive place, which is great. But what happens if the opposite happens, right? What happens if, and in doing so, you actually perpetuate and increase bias? It's still really early days for the technology, right? We don't have a lot of examples yet of this technology going awry. There's no dystopian situation right now where, tons of people are openly being discriminated against, or at least we just don't know if that's happening. So ultimately, these are all things that organizations should be thinking about as they implement the technology, and it's something we're happy to answer questions about and certainly happy to talk about. And I'll turn it over to Lisa to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, the big concept that I would love to see as a takeaway is that although, I mean, we're a firm that loves using technology as much as we can, partly because it's just fun, but partly because it's more effective in so many ways. And using any kind of software, AI, automation, will usually bring more efficiencies to the process and usually help address bias. And it's not perfect, but we somehow expect perfection from machines and computers. It's probably still going to be way better than all these biases that we humans just aren't self-aware about. So I always find it interesting that we and I hope we're not, perpetuating this where we attack the imperfections of AI and it's just not there yet. It's probably still way more often than not better than human judgment in terms of once the data going in is relatively clean, then the outcome's going to be fine, right? And so our human bias, we're not always self-aware about where our biases are, and so it is wonderful that that workplaces are turning their mind to this in the first place, and really developing tools to get a lot better at it. We certainly have dealt with lots of HR where they've made some decisions and it gets questioned, and they weren't aware that asking what is a person's first language, that's a huge exposure. It's opening up a whole discrimination claim on ethnic origin, for example. And it could be a totally innocent question, just a chit chat and make everyone feel comfortable at the beginning of the interview. So I think we put this really high standard on AI, but let's give it some time to get better and keep giving technology the chance to have the data going in to be clean, because garbage in is garbage out. So I think we're not there yet, but I think we're still better than many workplaces we've actually worked with. So it's a big work in progress. If you have any questions, we want to be really mindful of keeping this to half an hour. I know people are very, very busy. But if you have any questions, just give us a call. This concludes our legal update for today. We hope you'll join us on our next webinar, which is on November 20, Technology in the Workplace, the Remote Worker. This is in October. I think this is in October. Maybe we have the dates wrong. Sorry about that. In October is the Remote Worker. Please feel free to follow us directly on any of our social platforms. Follow up with one of our lawyers directly if you'd like. Come visit us at our website at www.springlaw.ca, where we have all of the key resources that we hope will be useful to you, and our contact information. I think that's all I have. Oren, any final comments on your end?
No, that was great. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to providing more legal updates soon. Have a great day.